Hey there, I'm Srini, host and founder of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast and the creator of Maximize Your Output with Mem. And in this video, I'm going to talk about what I've learned from my friend Tiago Forte's book, Building a Second Brain. For anybody who uses Mem, I highly recommend this book. Even though I knew the concept of the second brain, I've interviewed Tiago on the Unmistakable. He and I are friends. In fact, I was the one who made the introduction to my literary agent because I wanted him to write this book so badly. It was invaluable in terms of taking my knowledge of MEM to a whole other level. In fact, I convinced one of my old roommates to buy it, and I was so sure that it would be valuable. I told him that if he bought the book and he didn't think it was useful, I would actually give him the money for the book. And so what I'll do is I'll go over some of the key concepts that Tiago talks about in this book, and then I'll show you how to apply each one in MEM. The book is organized in 4 basic sections with the acronym CODE, which stands for Capture, Organize, Distill, and Express, which are the 4 core stages of how you build a second brain. And the thing for most people is that capture is where knowledge management usually ends. They save some notes to a folder or Evernote or whatever other note-taking app. They might highlight things in books, save them to ReadWise, but then they never do anything with it. So as a result, their notes end up not being particularly useful. So one of the things that Tiago suggests is to have actual criteria for what you capture and to be much more deliberate about it, because when you capture everything, it's like those people in college who highlight the entire textbook as if the entire textbook will be on the midterm, and then they actually don't know anything. So let's go into each one of these. Pretty much anything can be inspiring. It's not just necessarily notes from a book or some podcast or something that you typically think of as knowledge. It could be a memory of a conversation you had with someone, something you watched on TV, maybe something you heard on a podcast, maybe something you heard in a conversation with a friend. So, for example, my dad just had a 70th birthday, and my brother-in-law filmed a video and asked him what the secret to his happiness was, and we recorded it. The whole thing was about 40 seconds, but he summed up 4 really simple life lessons, and I thought that was super inspiring, so I actually transcribed it and made a note of it with tagged lessons for my dad because I thought it was really inspiring. Now, useful is obvious. This could be something that you read or think that you could use in a project. So, for example, a few weeks back, I read an article on Medium about a landing page with these 9 ingredients that will damn near print money. And because I saved that to Mem, when I was rewriting the Maximize Your Output sales page, I actually used those 9 ingredients as a checklist and incorporated a lot of the ideas. Personal, this could be a memorable conversation with a friend again, text message you exchange with someone. Tiago goes deeper into all of these in the book. Or maybe it was a lesson someone in your family shared that you thought was valuable. And then surprising. Now, surprising is great because this is really good because it exposes you to stuff that surprises you, obviously. And you open your mind and you reduce confirmation bias, which is this tendency to only seek information that confirms what you believe, even if it's inaccurate. And that's how you end up in echo chambers and end up just having very inaccurate ideas about a lot of things. So let's go into the other piece, which is organize. So organizing is often the big sort of issue for everybody when it comes to knowledge management. Like I said, they capture notes, then they don't use them. And so Tiago actually offers one really useful strategy. And that is this idea that you want to separate capture and organize into 2 distinct steps. Why do you want to do that? You want to capture before you organize because sometimes you're not sure how you'll use a note in the future. You might write down ideas and sometimes they don't bear fruit until years in the future. Chances are you're probably familiar with my friend Ryan Holiday, who's written 5 books, all of which are sold millions of copies at this time. But he uses something called a note card system, which is like an analog version of the Zettelkasten network thought that a lot of us have been talking about inside of tools like Mem. And one of the things he told me was that he wrote down the idea for his book, The Obstacle is the Way, on a note card. And he wrote that idea down 4 years before he wrote the book. And that book went on to sell 1 million copies, and he basically built a career off of it. The thing is that you just never know when these ideas will bear fruit. The other thing that Tiago talked about when it comes to organizing is that his system for organizing, which we'll get into here in just a second, called PARA, which stands for Projects, Areas, Resources, and Archives, is not a way of organizing information. It's not for storage, but it's for production. And the point isn't to be more organized, but to take action on your ideas more consistently. So, what that means is you want to organize your notes for taking action on them and relate them to a specific project. And when you don't know what project that is, then you just give it some sort of tag that will allow you to retrieve in the future. And we'll talk a little bit about Tiago's suggestions for how to make your notes more discoverable in the future. But the key thing here is that you want to organize your ideas for action. And we'll go into how to do all of this in Mem when we get into the section on Mem. But that was by far one of the most valuable things that I took away from the book, because it really made me rethink the entire structure of Para, which is the foundation of building a second brain, which we get into here. So projects are obvious. Anything that has a finite timeline with a defined end date is a project. So, for example, planning a birthday party is a project. Planning a vacation is a project. Writing a book is a project. Then you have areas. So, areas are your ongoing responsibility. So, if you think about it in the context of my work, for example, launching a new version of the Maximize Your Output course is a project. Creating videos like this one is an area of responsibility because this is something that is ongoing and it has no end date. And then finally, you have resources, which are all of the things that you capture. This could be book notes. This could be quotes that you write down from things you saw on TV, which I've done inside of Mem, and pretty much any other thing. And the last thing you have is archives. Now, why do we need archives? Part of the reason we need to archive old projects or things that are no longer relevant is because we need to clear that space so that we have a clear mind. Because even if you're using tags in Mem and you can find everything, you don't want your mind to be cluttered with the things that you're working on before. So even when I have folders in other tools, for example, when I was creating the new version of the course that just came out or writing a new sales page, I actually archived everything in a Dropbox folder once we were done with the launch. And that's because that is done and I don't want it on my mind. Another example, I made a slideshow for my dad's 70th birthday. So I had all these pictures in different folders and all that. And then finally, when it was done, I archived the entire project in my archives folder in Dropbox. So Para is the basic foundation and backbone of the concept of building a second brain. And Tiago goes really deep into all of these, and he does an amazing job in the book. It just gives you such a solid understanding of how to move your projects forward much faster, be on top of the things that are your areas of responsibility, and have instant access to your resources. And Mem, that's even easier than it is in almost any other tool. And then, why we talk about archiving, but he really goes deep into each one of these. I've talked to Tiago multiple times. I've always been a huge fan. He's been a guest on our podcast, but I got so much from this book. It just took my knowledge of how to organize Mem up to another level that it wasn't at before. So the next component of this is what Tiago calls distill. So what is distillation? Distillation really is about testing your true understanding of how well you really know something. So there are a couple of ways to do that. And so Tiago offers one method, which is what he calls progressive summarization. So if you look at your typical notes from a book, chances are you'll have quotes that you highlight if you're reading a Kindle book, or things that you've underlined if you're reading a physical book. And this is usually where note-taking ends for most people. They import this note into their note-taking app. They have all these quotes, and then they have no idea how to use them. Or if they refer to them in the future, they're not sure what is actually useful. And so what Tiago does is he breaks down this concept into layers, where the first layer is just the notes that you capture. So for example, if you have book notes, the 10 or so or 20 or so quotes, depending on how much you like to capture from each book you read, is your first layer. Then what you do is you go in and you bold everything that really stands out to you out of the notes that you capture. And then you get to the third layer, which is that you highlight out of the bold components, the things that are really important. So that way, when you go back to looking at that note, you can pull the most important things from it in seconds. And even while I was creating this video, I'm also simultaneously working on a new ultimate guide to building a second brain in Mem. And I had done progressive summarizations of the books that I wanted to reference, including Tiago's. And it took seconds to pull all the quotes that I wanted to use that I thought would be relevant to this ultimate guide that I'm working on. The other component, of course, is Smart Notes. Now, Smart Notes by nature force you to distill because you're rewriting everything in your own words. And of course, I've created tutorials on how to take Smart Notes, which you can find on the channel. But Smart Notes and progressive summarization combined really give you a lot of power because they make your reference notes or verbatim quotes about 1,000 times more valuable because you can just look at the most important parts. And then Smart Notes force you to rewrite things in your own words. So when you rewrite things in your own words, two things happen. One, you end up reinforcing your understanding, but in that process, you'll also come up with new ideas and new insights where you can create memes and capture those as well. And then finally, we get to the whole point of the second brain, which is to express yourself. Because ultimately, our goal with all of this capturing of information is to do something useful with it in your life. So, this is what I call the cycle of knowledge generation, where you capture notes, you capture ideas, you create project plans, you have insights. And then, of course, what your goal to do is to put all of that together and put it to use. And this is meta, but I planned out this entire video using my notes that I took while I was reading Tiago's book. And so the ultimate goal here really is that what you're after is creative output or finished projects. That ultimately is what the second brain is for. Tiago talks about the fact that this is not just a method for storing or organizing information, but it's a method for producing knowledge. And ultimately, the term knowledge management to me really doesn't make a lot of sense because our goal here is not to manage information, it's to generate knowledge and generate insights. So these are the core principles that he talks about in the book. I highly recommend that you get the book because it will be one of the best investments you will make in your ability to get the most out of MEM. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of MEM and I'm going to show you how these concepts work. So now that I've gone through the key concepts in Tiago's book, I want to show you how I've applied each one of the core ideas in MEM. And one of the things you'll start to see is that I've got a lot of content inside of MEM. And the first thing that Tiago talks about in the section on capture is separating capture and organize into two distinct steps, because often we don't know what we're going to do with something. We don't know when we're going to use it or how we're going to use it. So for example, something that happens to me often is that I will come up with ideas while I'm writing something else that become a bidirectional link, and I'm not sure what I want to do with them. So when I didn't use the inbox, I would often have these empty notes that didn't get filled. Now what I do is I just add them to the inbox. So that way, whenever I am ready to process it, I can process it. For example, if I wanted to, I could just say, this is going to be a blog post idea, and I can give it the tag UC blog, and then call it blog post idea. And now that I know what it's for, I can actually remove it from my inbox. And you can see here I have a couple of different things here that I haven't dealt with. I'm working on the ultimate guide to building a second brain in MEM, which is almost done. In fact, I finished writing the draft this afternoon, but I have a few last things I want to do on it. So I put it in my inbox. But let's say that I wanted to work on this tomorrow morning or deal with it tomorrow morning. I can actually say tomorrow, 8 a.m., and then it'll disappear from my inbox. So that's one way to use this entire concept of separate, capture, and organize. So if we go to the timeline, you'll see here that I have a lot of content in here. I've captured lots of book notes. I've captured podcast transcripts. I have different ideas, things that I forwarded to myself. And I want to show you a couple of different examples because in MEM, the whole idea of organizing information is a paradox because it's a self-organizing workspace. So the best way I found to think of this is rather than thinking of Para in terms of folders, what happens in MEM is that tags actually become your replacement for folders. So let's go into an example of a literature note. So this is actually a literature note right from Tiago's book. And the concept behind literature notes, if you are not familiar, is that you're taking what are called smart notes, where you rewrite a key idea in your own words in order to enhance your understanding of it. And so I ended up writing this, and I know what the source is. And then if I click on the tag literature notes, what you'll see here when I click on it is that all my tags with literature notes show up right here, or all my mems with literature notes show up right here. And there's at this point several thousand of them. And those notes end up being really useful because I can actually use them for other things. I can connect them to new projects and new ideas. And that way I end up being able to use them. For example, let me just show you one example that I came up with the other day where I just weaved all of this different stuff together. So if we go to my timeline, and we pull up this, you'll see here that this is actually a piece that I shared in the Slack group for Mem. You can see here it's all made up of different notes that I connected because of the fact that I've captured notes in a certain way. And so I just can easily pull them and I know how I want to use them. One last example I want to show you of this is transcripts. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the transcript tag. And the reason I keep these transcripts inside of Mem is because I like to pull content from the Unmistakable Creative Podcast because our guests teach me a lot of things that I find useful. And I like to be able to use their wisdom, things that I'm writing. So for example, if I pull up the word transcript, you can see here, if we do this via search, it shows up here. And here's a transcript from Leslie M. And if I click on transcript, what you'll see here is all the various things that are tagged with transcript. Some of these have transcript inside of them because I've referenced that in other things that I was writing. But here's another example where I just put the transcript tag in so I could quickly access my transcripts. And you can see here that all the various mems with each one of these people shows up. And if I click on transcript again, every single note that has a transcript tag or mentions the word transcript is actually right there. So this ends up being really useful when you want to organize information. So you basically can replace tags with folders. And I found that it's best to keep your tags fairly general rather than extremely specific, because you want to tag your notes based on context, not on topic, which is something Tiago talks about a lot. In fact, he has an entire article about tagging your notes by context. I'll include a link in the description below. But because of the fact that contexts are limited and topics are infinite, this actually makes it much easier to keep your tagging structure a lot simpler. And I'll be doing a video in the next couple of days on how to simplify and organize your tags inside of Mem. Now let's get into the concept of distillation. Distillation is the main thing that makes your notes discoverable in the future. And I showed you my literature notes, which are one example, which is where you're rewriting things in your own words. But let me show you what progressive summarization looks like. In fact, we'll actually just pull Tiago's book, and I'll show you how I used his progressive summarization technique to progressively summarize his book. So you can see here, I did a summary. I have things that are underlined, things that are bolded. These are the things that I really wanted to remember and ended up using actually in some of the content that I've been writing. And you can see here that basically this allows me to get the gist of this book and look at the things that are really important, things that stood out. Because one of the things that Tiago says is that the content inside of any piece of knowledge isn't evenly distributed. So there's a handful of things that really stand out, and those are the things that we want to be able to capture. Another example of progressive summarization is this right here. And so when we were relaunching the MEM course, I emailed our list to find out what their biggest challenges were with knowledge management. And you can see here that I actually bolded a lot of these things. And if you go to the Maximize Your Output sales page, you'll see that you will find almost these exact words in a lot of the copy, because this actually helped me really understand what I wanted to include in the sales page, and it actually saved me a lot of time. And you can see here, basically, out of all this survey data, there may be a handful of things that really I could use, but by bolding all of it and progressively summarizing the entire set of survey data, the survey data becomes a lot more digestible. So now let's go into an actual project. I'm going to show you how I used all of these concepts to do a recent launch of the Maximize Your Output course. So you can see here that I actually pulled a lot of these things, again, as a template from Tiago's book. I took what he put in the book in terms of how he organized these projects, and I just created a template inside of Flows and Mem. So that way, anytime I wanted to have a project, I could use that same structure. But the big thing that I found really valuable that ended up helping me be able to do this much faster than I would have been able to do in the past was what Tiago calls the archipelago of islands. And that whole idea is that you gather all the things that you need in one place. You can see that I have a bunch of links here, all the various launch sequences from previous launches, different testimonials that I've received, the first version, the second version. And then I basically gathered every single note I had. And if you look at these survey responses here, you'll notice how the organizational structure of these notes mirrors the survey responses. So I basically just pulled every single note that I had that was related to what challenges everybody here was facing. And then I pulled all the different books that I thought would make sense. And then I mentioned this in the first part of this video where I had read this article about the landing page with 9 ingredients that would print money. And I actually used this concept as a checklist for the landing page, because one of the things I realized was that I had what he called earned credibility, where I had places that I had spoken, companies that work with, media outlets where I'd been featured. I'd never included that on the sales page. And so this actually helped me to do that. So one by one, I just went through this as a checklist because I had it there as a resource under what Tiago calls your archipelago of ideas. And so by doing this, you're able to move your projects forward so much faster than you would when you're having to gather all your resources from all these different places. So this is a basic overview of some of the key concepts. I cannot recommend Tiago's book high enough. If you are already a power user of Mem, I think you'll get even more out of it than you are currently getting out of Mem, because I, even as familiar as I was with all of his work, this took my understanding of how to use Mem to another level. And I'm able to do things I couldn't do before. My notes are becoming a lot more useful. In a couple of days, we'll be launching the ultimate guide to building your second brain in Mem. And I will include a link in the description below to that, where you can sign up with your email address, and I'll let you know when it's done. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below.